privileged to introduce our guest speaker for this session, Mr. Robert Offner. Robert Offner holds an MA in Buddhist Studies from Tanjung Asia in Kathmandu, Nepal, and has served as an instructor in Buddhist history and philosophy at the Institute. He is currently conducting research to document the sacred sites associated with Buddhist masters across India, Nepal, and Tibet. In addition to his research, Robert is the director of the operation for the summer immersion program at Samya, New York, a Buddhist center in upstate New York, under the guidance of Gautam Buddha. Today we are fortunate to have Robert with us, and we are eager to hear his presentation on Nekhor, exploring the rich history of Buddhist pilgrimage and the sacred site of Padmasambhava. I have no doubt that we will all leave with this session with a valuable insight and a renewed sense of inspiration. Please join me in giving warm welcome to Mr. Robert Offner.
Well, thank you, Niroj, and thanks everybody for coming out. Yeah, it's really great to be able to present on this for a group of people. A lot of my work has been kind of remote, me in my living room doing research and talking across continents to various people that have been also working on this project. So just like a quick background on the project, as Niroj said, I did a Buddhist Studies master's degree at Rangjung Yeshe in a Boda area of Kathmandu, and while there, it was like 2014, a friend of mine who was also studying was kind of nudged into this work of looking up the different sites of Guru Rinpoche, mainly in Nepal initially. It was just kind of trying to document it in a bit more of a, I don't want to say scholastic way, but just trying to get the information that is a little bit more authentic as per how the lineage understands it, because I'm sure if anybody's ever been to some of these places, a lot of information gets easily misconstrued or misinterpreted, and there might be like 10 different versions of the story of what happened in a place, which is also fine. There's many interpretations for how people, might witness the Buddha's activity. That's actually part of how skillful means work. But regardless, our thing was we wanted to kind of get the I don't want to say right information, but we wanted to get it oriented with the lineage as it presents itself. In this case, we're mainly dealing with, as I said, Guru Rinpoche sites and dealing with Organ Lingpa's Pema Katam, which is an elaborate life story of Guru Rinpoche. But anyway, the project started in 2014, and it was really, so Patrick Rinpoche is a Nyingmapa Lama. His father was an emanation of the great Tibetan Chogyur Lingpa. And so that family is deeply connected to Guru Rinpoche and Guru Rinpoche's activity in general. And his wife, Patrick Rinpoche's wife, have to bring her up, Kandala Norbu, she was the one that really pushed this project forward. And the other person I want to say, because I mainly worked as an editor on the books and also have done a lot of videography of the sites. But the bulk of the research was really done by Stefan Mang, and the majority of the writing was done by my other friend Peter Woods. I did a lot of editing, and then I was able to kind of summarize a lot of this work and turn it into a website, and also turned it into an app so people could actually physically go to the sites. A lot of my research was more around how do you actually get there, what do you do when you're there, so the kind of nitty-gritty of visiting these places. Anyway, without further ado, let's kind of jump into it. And a big way, can't really talk about pilgrimage and Buddhism without starting with the Buddha, so we're gonna start there. In general, it seems like, I don't know that we have documentation prior to the Buddha of a sort of a founder of a religion, specifically telling people to do pilgrimage and to visit sites. I mean, we do have obviously pilgrimage existing in, the Hindu world, but that isn't as much given as like a direct instruction as it is with the Buddha. Later on, you have Muhammad telling people obviously to go to Mecca, which becomes kind of the most dominant form of pilgrimage in the world. The Buddhist pilgrimage dates back all the way, I mean, prior to the Buddha, because the Buddha himself did pilgrimage to sites of previous Buddhas during his lifetime, and even noted at times when he was around, a site where he knew that Kashyapa Buddha had taught in the past, because the Buddha had deep insight into these things, could kind of recollect elements of past lives that most people couldn't. But let's start with Shakyamuni Buddha himself and his own instruction. So this goes back to the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, and towards the end of this sutta, so this sutta, it describes the events leading up to the Buddha's death, his Mahaparinibbana, and then what happened after his death, and the sort of how his remains, his relics were distributed. So we have this very famous line where he's talking to one of his main disciples. He says, Ananda, these 4 places that should be seen by a faithful gentleman, that should cause agitation. Here the Tathagata was born. Ananda is a place that should be seen by a faithful gentleman that should cause agitation. So this he's talking about, I'm sure you all know, Lumbini, the site where the Buddha was born, which is currently in Nepal. Another thing that's just before we get into the sort of country divisions and where these sites currently are, at this time these names didn't exist. There was no place called Nepal. Well, if there was Nepal, it was really just talking about the Kathmandu Valley, so where the Buddha lived, which is in the Terai region in the southern part of Nepal, was just another kingdom of the greater Indian subcontinent. But this idea of India, Nepal, Pakistan, these sort of hardline borders, these weren't happening at this time, 2,500 years ago. So first the Buddha says the place where the Buddha was born is a place you should visit. Second, here the Tathagata awakened to unsurpassed perfect awakening. Ananda is a place that should be seen by a faithful gentleman that should cause agitation. So here he's talking about Bodh Gaya. Here the unsurpassed rule of the law was termed by the Tathagata. Ananda is a place that should be seen by a faithful gentleman that should cause agitation. So this is talking about Sarnath, just outside of Varanasi. And then he says here the Tathagata attained complete Nirvana by the element of Nibbana without any remainder. Ananda is a place that should be seen by a faithful gentleman that should cause agitation. So this is Kushinagar, where the Buddha would pass away. One important aspect of this that I want to point out is this term agitation and sort of the effect that pilgrimage has on somebody's mind stream that is visiting these places. So some people have changed this translation to say it should cause devotion or some sort of a strong sense in your heart of connection, but I would argue that agitation is a good term because the idea is it's supposed to kind of shake up your experience of being in the samsaric world. So it has this ability to kind of cut through the stream of samsaric activity simply by viewing these places. And the Buddha really stressed this idea of some sort of a physical contact. So when somebody is able to attain such a state as Buddhahood, there are obviously the being while they're alive is extremely beneficial to even see or contact that individual. But there's ripple effects of that activity and that level of realization that can be transmitted well beyond that being's physical presence in the universe. But even just like a small hair or a fingernail, any element of a relic of a being of that nature has the effect to really sort of jumpstart something for us ordinary beings and set us off on this potentially very, very long path to complete Buddhahood. So I think agitation is good because you go to these places and it sort of has this, if anybody's ever been to some of these sites, it does kind of have this effect of you experience something that maybe you've never experienced before. And you connect to something that seems very familiar, but you may not have connected to that so far in this lifetime. So it has that effect. And so the Buddha is really stressing people to make an effort to go to these places. Not just because he's this cool guy either, but because it has this ability to really benefit people. So this is the meeting. As I said, this is where the Buddha was born. Has anybody ever been here?
Yes.
Yeah, very nice. It is very accessible now because there's an airport nearby. But you can also fly, if you're in Kathmandu, you can take a long bus to Lumbini. It is, if you have the money, I say take a flight, but if you are traveling on a budget, then the bus works just fine. There are no trains in Nepal, so that's not an option. And this is an image. I'm not going to go through too much detail of what happened at each one of these sites of the Buddha, because honestly, I have way too many slides to get through today to cover all this information, but I'm gonna do my best. But this is an image of Maya Devi. That's the mother of the Buddha, and this is her giving birth from her side to Buddha Shakyamuni in the Garden of Lumbini. So actually, the Buddha Maya Devi had a kingdom. She was a queen or a princess in a kingdom, and she sort of left her palace to go to this peaceful garden because she felt that it was nearing the time to give birth to the Buddha. So she walked to there, and that's where she gave birth to Shakyamuni. And then the Buddha was born and took these steps and sort of pointed to the sky and said that this would be his final go-round in samsara. And then after this miraculous display, went back into being a normal baby and then proceeded along the path to awakening. The Buddha left, the kingdom at that time that the Buddha was raised in was called Kapilavastu, and the Buddha left his whole family behind. Everybody knows this story, I imagine, if you guys are doing a master's program in Buddhist studies, so don't need to go into too much detail here. But eventually the Buddha, after many, many years of training, was able to make his way to Bodh Gaya. And in Bodh Gaya, he attained awakening. And I think it's interesting to note that it's not just Shakyamuni Buddha who awakened here. It said that every Buddha of countless eons has came to this spot, the Vajra seat, as the Tibetans refer to it as. And this is where the magic happens. This is where you become a Buddha. This is it. And this is another great context, Buddha attaining awakening there in Bodh Gaya. So later we'll see, when I get into Guru Rinpoche, he also returns here. And then this is, without a doubt, the most significant pilgrimage site of them all. If you're supposed to make it to all four if you're a Buddhist, but if you can really only make it to one, this is the one. Definitely don't miss Bodh Gaya if you can make it there. Then following his awakening in Bodh Gaya, he initially didn't think it was a good idea to teach at all, so famously kind of stayed in the forest until he was requested by Brahma to go and give teaching to the beings, but he thought nobody would understand. But then he, after scanning the universe and seeing that all his former meditation instructors had passed away, he decided that he would go find his former ascetic companions and teach the Dharma to them. And so he noticed that they were nearby Sarnath, which is today just outside of Varanasi. I mean, at that time, Varanasi was also an active city. It's one of the oldest continually inhabited cities in the whole world, as I understand. They say it's the oldest in Varanasi. But so the Buddha went here to Deer Park. And again, this is a place that every Buddha, this is where they first teach the Dharma. So all these places aren't just necessarily random parts that the Buddha chose because they look nice. There's some sort of a thing about these sites that is, it's where these activities transpire. So the Buddha goes here and he teaches the first turning of the wheel of Dharma. This is really like the foundational elements of Buddhism. I'm sure you all know, the Four Noble Truths, dependent origination, these aspects that all the traditions agree upon. And then the fourth place that the Buddha recommends visiting in your life, if you can, is Kushinagar, where he passed away. This is I haven't been there. This is the most difficult of all the main pilgrimage spots of the Buddha to get to. This is the one I haven't been to. I've been to the other three. Sarnath's quite easy to get to as a day trip from Varanasi. Bodh Gaya, easy to get. You can fly to Gaya or take a train there from Varanasi, very easy. And then from the airport, you can take a tuk-tuk all the way over to the Buddha's Bodhi tree almost. So it's very, very accessible. This one is a little less accessible, but not the hardest to reach. And then there are these other 4 sites I want to just quickly point out in relation to the Buddha. So the Buddha suggested visiting these 4 main pilgrimage sites, which I'm sure you all are relatively familiar with. But then these other 4 are sites mainly associated with different miracles that occurred during the Buddha's lifetime. And so you could kind of call these there's the 8 great sites of the Buddha, as it's sometimes said. So the 4 major and then 4 sites of miracles. I don't want to say 4 minor, but these 4 other sites that are definitely good to visit. And I haven't been to these ones. Well, I've been to one of them in Rajgir, but I've never been to Vaishali. So Vaishali, all of these cities, if you read sutra, you can see, every time you read a sutra, it always says where the sutra was taught. Vaishali, it comes up a lot. And so the main event that happened here, the most famous thing, well, actually the most famous thing was, this is where the Bhikshuni Sangha began. This is where the Buddha first ordained his aunt, who was really his mother in many ways, who raised him. But this is the event that happened here that marks it as a site of a miracle, is there was a monkey who saw the Buddha, and again, this kind of goes back to this sort of incredible presence of these awakened beings. This monkey was so drawn to the Buddha that the monkey scrambled into a tree to a beehive and collected honey, and then brought the honey down to the Buddha, and the Buddha accepted the offering, and the monkey was so excited when the Buddha accepted the offering and started climbing around, jumping around like crazy, and fell into this deep well and ended up dying. But it wasn't the worst thing in the world, because then this monkey was reborn and would later take the Buddha as his guru, as his teacher, and attained awakening. It became an arhat in human form. So this was the site of this great miracle in Vaishali. Rajgir, this one is not far from Bodh Gaya, pretty easy to get to. So from Rajgir, you can also go to Nalanda, is very close, which was one of the earliest Buddhist monasteries, one of the earliest universities ever in the world, and certainly one of the biggest libraries that the world's ever seen. So Rajgir, though, was a big city at the time of the Buddha. He visited here many times. He was offered a retreat center here. One of the kings here offered him a place for his monks to spend time in retreat. But what happened here that is documented as the big miracle was the taming of this wild elephant named Nalgiri. And I don't know if you guys have heard about the Buddha's cousin who got really jealous and was always trying to kill him. So the Buddha's cousin basically got this elephant really drunk and then sent the elephant off to try to attack the Buddha. And the Buddha, rather than kind of running and being scared, was able to pacify the elephant on the spot. And it was this great miracle that occurred. The next is Shravasi, which is the site of this is another thing that all Buddhists do. But in the Pali, you'll see this translated as the twin miracle, but in the Sanskrit text, they talk about it as the great miracle. So this is where the Buddha, one of the twin miracle is where he levitates into the sky and emits fire and water from his body. But in this great miracle, he also multiplies his body in countless forms to fill the universe, which you see come up again and again. And if you do sadhana practice, the Buddha is as infinite as atoms are in the universe, this sort of thing. So the Buddha demonstrated this display at Shravasi, and we're actually approaching the celebratory day of this. So leading up to Losar, well, after Losar, leading up to the full moon, we enter into what the Tibetans call is Bumgir Dawa, which is this great multiplying month where merit becomes like way more. You can any good act or negative act that you do is multiplied 1,000 times over during this month. So it's really a good time to go out and do positive acts, or really a good time to do pilgrimage, is what they emphasize in this time. The first 15 days of the new year. So the culmination of it is on Chochul Duchen. So Chochul Duchen is the first full moon of the new year, and this is celebrating these 15 days of miracles that the Buddha performed at this site, Shravasti. And then you have Sankashya. So after he performed these miracles in Shravasti, then he ascended into the heavens, where he would go on to teach his mother, who was present there, as well as countless gods in this realm. But he didn't spend the rest of his time there. He was supplicated by his students to return, so the Buddha descended back down from the heavens in this site called Sankashya. Now this, as I understand, is hands down the most difficult of all the sites to visit. It's in a very remote part of India. Most of these sites are in and around Bihar too, which is already a bit of a difficult place to visit. So if you do go, just be warned that some of this is not always the most comfortable forms of travel. Okay, so I think it was really necessary to talk about Shakyamuni, because without the Buddha, we couldn't really talk about Guru Rinpoche. But after the Buddha's death in Kushinagar, he, at least according to the Pema Khatam, which is the life story that we use for these books to talk about Guru Rinpoche, according to that text, the Buddha predicted that there would be another Buddha to come 12 years after his passing, which is pretty wild to think about. But Guru Rinpoche would then later, he was predicting Guru Rinpoche's birth. And so the Buddha said that after 12 years' time, that there would be an emanation that would spread the Vajrayana teachings far and wide. And that was none other than Guru Padmasambhava. So these are the books, as you see, and I have them out here. And actually, I'll just, I don't know, pass some of these around. If you guys, as I'm talking about these sites, maybe people can kind of flip through the books. So just a quick kind of background on how we decided to publish these. We started off in Nepal because we were all living in Nepal at that time, and it was the easiest place to do research in. But also the main reason we started off in Nepal is because of the stupa is located there, where Guru Rinpoche in a previous lifetime had made these aspirations to spread the Dharma far and wide. So the story goes that, I don't know if anybody's ever been to the Bodha Stupa in Kathmandu, but it's one of the great stupas of the world. And especially for Tibetans, this is like the best stupa there is, because it's where the aspirations were initially made for Buddhism to enter Tibet. So the story goes that there was a poultry farmer, this daughter of a poultry farmer, had this idea that it would be really nice to build a stupa in this plot of land. And so she went to a king and asked the king if it could be built. And so the king said, basically said, let it be done, or I forget the exact term, but the Tibetans call it the Jaran Karshor. So Jaran Karshor means like slip of the tongue in Tibetan. So it means like the stupa that was granted through the king's slip of the tongue, saying, let it be done. And the king told her that she could do it, but she had to only make it the size of a cow's hide. And so she was pretty smart, and so she said, that's no problem for me. Took the cowhide and strung it out into this, rather than taking one flat thing, she cut it into a really long strip and was able to make it this long, big area that you see today as the Bodha Stupa. But she wasn't actually able to complete the construction of the stupa. She passed away before it was finished. So her children, she had 4 sons, They finished the stupa, and upon completion, these four brothers looked towards the Himalayas and made an aspiration to each be born with different roles in that area and spread the Dharma far and wide. So one of them wished to be born as a great king, who would later be reborn as King Trisundetsen. The other one wished to be reborn as a great monk and abbot, and this was ended up being Santaraksita. And the other one wished to be born as a great tantrika, a practitioner of Vajrayana, and this would end up being Guru Rinpoche. And the third one, for some reason, wished to be born as like a secretary, or he ended up being reborn as one of the main financiers of Tibet. But the three brothers are the ones that are really remembered the most in this story, and we'll get back to them when we talk about Samya Monastery coming up here in a second. But I just wanted to get into that to say that's why we started off here in Nepal, because the Buddhist stupa is located in Nepal. But really, in terms of the chronology of Guru Rinpoche's life, it starts in terms of the form that we understand it. I mean, when you talk about life stories of masters in Buddhism, you're getting into, beginningless time. So you have emanations of these beings that go back in, distant eons that come up, in different versions. But in terms of the emanation that we all know, Guru Padmasambhava, begins in what's now called India, but really in a lake called Dhanakosha. So we started though in Nepal. That was the first one we published. And then we got into India, and then we finally published the Tibet version. And so in terms of understanding Guru Rinpoche's life, I think it's easiest to understand India as sort of the land where he studied and became, this great guru. In Nepal is where he really practiced. He did a lot of his retreat in the caves in Nepal, Asura Cave and Marathi Cave. And then in Tibet, we can understand this really as his place of activity. So we can kind of say study, practice, activity. I mean, obviously he practiced a lot in India too. We'll talk about that. But in India is where he really met all of his teachers. Anybody who gave him the transmissions for a lot of these lineages that we have today in the Nyingmapa, all these came through these various Mahasiddhas that were roaming around India during Guru Rinpoche's lifetime. Also keep in mind that Guru Rinpoche's lifetime spans around 1,200 years. So really he's right there for the entire history of Buddhism as it develops through Asia. We have, he gets ordained at one point by Ananda, the Buddha's direct disciple. He meets several other masters who, if you were to look at at the dates, you would think like, wait a minute, Guru Rinpoche is supposed to be 8th century and this guy is in 200 CE. How did he meet Nagarjuna and things like this? But this is kind of, a lot of these things we throw out the window when it comes to the life story of Guru Rinpoche as an embodiment of that which goes completely beyond concepts. So let's see. Let's start by reading a nice quote. So this is just as Buddha gave this instruction when he was passing about making pilgrimage to the sites of the 4 sites I mentioned earlier. Guru Rinpoche has a similar thing, and he didn't really pass in the same way that Buddha Shakyamuni did. Guru Rinpoche actually attained rainbow body and left not a single trace of his remains. But as he was attaining this state, he was supplicated by his main disciple, Pandra Yeshub Sogyal, who was his main Tibetan consort, and he gave this instruction. When you recount my life story, you will be filled with inspiration. When you see my qualities and my understanding, deep faith will be born within you. When that faith becomes unshakable conviction, then my blessing will enter and transform you. When your mind is free of all doubts, whatever you wish can be achieved. So here he really makes, encourages us to really read his life story, and to read the life story, then we can understand what these different sites are how they can affect us in our mind streams. We've talked about this, so I am gonna, oh, this is Nepal here, or this is where the Buddhist stupa is located right here. Some pictures of the Buddhist stupa. So this is the area here where the wall is. This is what is said to be where the daughter of the poultry farmer stretched the cowhide all the way around. Today there are really countless relics in there. I'm not going to try to list all of them, but one of the main relics is a relic of the Buddha of Apacity, Buddha Kashyapa. They say is inside of there. But many, many, many more relics outside of just that one. And this is a nice drawing of the four brothers making the aspiration to be reborn. So Guru Rinpoche's life story in this form really begins in this lake called Dhanakosha, which he actually is said to be an emanation of Amitabha. So from Amitabha's heart center, he emitted this Sri syllable, and this seed syllable appeared on a lotus on a lake, which then turned into this beautiful 8-year-old boy, this kind of pure child. And really Guru Rinpoche in this form represents just the purity of our own nature, you could say, or Dharmakaya. So we'll read this. South and west of the land of Uddiyana lay an isle within a great ocean, source of auspicious signs. Upon the island was a Udumbara grove of lotus flowers. In the light of day, the flowers sank below the water's surface. By night, they rose and bloomed again, shimmering with light. From these Dhanakosha waters, our noble guide took birth. So Guru Rinpoche was born here, and he didn't really have much of an agenda to go out and do anything in particular, but there was a king who was out in the lake. There's a story of King Indrabodhi, who was the king of this kingdom of Uddiyana, and he was in search of jewels to save his kingdom. There was this island that was supposed to have this wish-fulfilling jewel that would save his kingdom. He went there, and he actually left empty-handed. He wasn't able to find the wealth that he was looking for to save his kingdom, but in his journey, he did stumble upon this glistening 8-year-old boy in the middle of the lake. And I don't have the exact quote in front of me, but basically Indrabodhi saw this and was obviously kind of fascinated with what was happening there. It's not a very normal thing to witness in the middle of the lake. And he asked the boy who his parents were, and Guru Rinpoche essentially told him that he doesn't have any parents. His parents are the unborn nature of our own mind, and he's a manifestation of that. And so the king was excited to hear about this and said, okay, we're going to take you back to Uddiyana. And so the king brought this child back to his kingdom and made him a prince, where Guru Rinpoche lived for many years. So this is a rendition of Dhanakosha. These sites, so just in terms of where this actually is, we think it's in Pakistan. And we've located it really in the Swat Valley, which is a very beautiful part of Pakistan, but I've never been there, and I was just talking to Narosh about it. It's a little bit difficult to travel to, but I would love to go. And that whole region of the world is actually kind of the breeding grounds for Vajrayana, Mahayana, as it kind of developed into Vajrayana, was a big hub for it. But today, there's very little remnants of it. You still see stone carvings of Buddhas and rocks in certain areas of Pakistan, but in terms of it being practiced and these sites really being well preserved, they haven't been through the years, which is unfortunate. But nonetheless, the land is still ripe with blessings, so I think going there with this sort of pilgrim's mindset could be a very powerful, transformative experience. And I'm going to talk a little bit about these sort of the ability for certain masters with connection to Guru Rinpoche to recognize other sites as being the same as the original site, sort of replicas that serve the same purpose. So there is Danakosha, which is a lake in this region near Uddiyana, and then the kingdom of Uddiyana is in this Swat Valley area. And so this is another quote I'll read. In those days, the western land of Uddiyana held 5 states and 21 counties. At the heart of these states lay Danakosha, and Uddiyana's capital, known as Beautiful, which is direct translation. In the city center stood the 9-tufted palace, a precious citadel of lapis lazuli. All were there: the fortress of excellent Dharma clouds, the cavern of immutable Vajra, the charnel ground of dark cloud banks, the palace of effortless display, and the temple of Herukas. And this is a rendition of what Uddiyana may have looked like at Guru Rinpoche's time. So Guru Rinpoche is taken here and enthroned as a prince, and in time is basically given the keys to the kingdom. And so we're seeing a pretty similar pattern as Shakyamuni Buddha's story, where he has this life of total luxury, essentially able to just be as hedonistic as you want, do whatever you want, and not worry about any of the sort of petty things that most people worry about. So he's able to kind of live the life in a God realm, really, without the ordinary suffering of normal beings. But still, he knows that there's a sense of dissatisfaction in this life. And Guru Rinpoche doesn't want to leave and just walk away, so he kind of devises a plan to where he's kicked out of the kingdom. And so what Guru Rinpoche does is he puts on these kind of wild robes of a yogi and starts doing a Vajra dance on top of the palace. And while he's doing his dance, he allows his dorje and his katvanga to slip out of his hand, so this trident, and he inadvertently kills a infant and a mother. And this is seen as an act of murder. Everybody is very upset that this prince has done this, and so they order the king to get rid of this child who he found, in the middle of the lake. This time, Guru Rinpoche is not 8 anymore either. He's been in the kingdom for quite some time. So Guru Rinpoche tells the king's very sad, and he says, "I'm sorry you have to go," and Guru Rinpoche kind of consoles him and says, "It's okay, I'm going to go on this great journey, and I'll actually come back and teach you Dharma." And so Guru Rinpoche leaves the kingdom, and he goes first towards Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha attained enlightenment. And he starts practicing in a pretty fierce place called the Sitavana Charnel Ground. So real quick, this is just to give you a visual, the Swat Valley. And before we get into the Charnel Ground stuff, let me just point this out. So you have up here, this is modern day Pakistan, where most scriptures point to, this is the most likely location of Uddiyana. But later in the 20th century, a great master, Chatra Rinpoche, who is said to have had pure vision, which means he was able to see things that most ordinary beings can't, and was, some believe, an emanation of Guru Rinpoche himself. So as such, he was able to point out specific places that could also serve as pilgrimage for people wanting to connect directly with Guru Rinpoche's blessings. And so he pointed out another area. There we go. Dr. Rinpoche pointed out that down here around Gujarat, in this region, is sort of a second site that you can visit as Uddiyana. And near there, so Ujjain is near here, and then, let's see if I have some pictures. Then there's another site that has been identified as being identical to Danakosha. And it's much easier to visit this site than the one in Pakistan. So Chatra Rinpoche sort of opened this site up for other pilgrims to visit if they wish to connect to these blessings. So as I was saying, after Guru Rinpoche leaves Udayana, he goes towards Bodh Gaya, and in Bodh Gaya, he practices in a charnel ground. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with charnel grounds or what that is, but this idea of the 8 charnel grounds of India really ties into the transmission of the Nyingma lineage into Tibet very directly. So there's these 8 sites that Guru Rinpoche practiced in, did these sort of more tantric practices that you wouldn't see in other traditions. And the story behind it basically goes back all the way to Sri Lanka, well, what we call Sri Lanka today. But in many, many eons ago, Guru Rinpoche took a different form of Hayagriva and had to take on this really kind of fierce demon called Rudra. Rudra had previously been on the Dharma path, but got kind of converted to a darker side of things, and as such kind of became the embodiment of egohood itself. So Guru Rinpoche took on this wrathful form and was able to tame Rudra, and upon taming Rudra, basically blew up his body and dispersed his body parts throughout the Indian subcontinent. And so the different parts where Rudra's body landed is where we have the 8 charnel grounds of India. And these charnel grounds are where we also have this idea of the 8 Vijayadharas of India, which are these Indian Mahasiddhas that practice these different deities that are directly related to the Kagye deities that were later transmitted into Tibet, and later Guru Rinpoche would practice at these different caves in Tibet that are these 8 caves of practice, and also transmitted these deities to his students there. But this side of Mount Malaya we can really point to as sort of the beginnings of the Tantric tradition itself, and these 8 charnel grounds are really where we have the emergence of Tantra in our current world system coming from. I'll just kind of go through these relatively quickly. Actually, we probably don't have time to hit them at all, so I'm glad I don't discuss the charnel grounds. Sitavana, Tulizokpa, this is located in Ladakh. And then we have the Lundrup Sack, which is located in Bodha itself. Lanka Sack. We don't have time to go through. There's too many slides here. I think good to kind of move into the 8 manifestations of Guru Rinpoche that are also associated with these 8 charnel grounds. But I think good to move a little bit into Nepal. Well, we don't have too much time. Yeah, lots more to discuss in India. But we'll start with just Lachin Mandarava, because this will bring us into Nepal. So while Guru Rinpoche was practicing in India, one of the famous stories was the meeting of the Princess Mandarava. He met Mandarava in the kingdom of Zahwar, and sort of she was meeting with Guru Rinpoche kind of secretly, receiving teachings from him. And her father found out and essentially just saw that it was his daughter hanging out with this wild yogi alone, and he had all sorts of thoughts around what was possibly going on between them. And so out of anger, the king decided to burn Guru Rinpoche at the stake. And so he set this pyre to flames and let Guru Rinpoche burn for, I think it's a week. And notice that he wasn't actually burning. He was burning and burning and burning. And after about a week's time, he decided maybe I should check on this flame that seems to not go out. And sure enough, when he put the flames out, Guru Rinpoche emerged as Soki Dorje and was this sort of pure being after a week of being attempted to be incinerated, was actually emerged as this very beautiful pure being that the king immediately was able to recognize as a great emanation of awakening. And so the king took refuge with Guru Rinpoche on the spot and allowed him and Mandarava to go off and do as they pleased. That's sort of short and sweet. And so this we can now visit in Tsopema. I don't know if you all are familiar with this site, but this is probably the most well-known retreat place of Guru Rinpoche. This is not too far from Himachal Pradesh, where the Dalai Lama has all the Gelugpa centers. The state I'm blanking on right now, but it's in the Himalayan region of India. Mandi? Yeah.
Monday.
Yeah, sorry. But the Sopema actually, where it's recognized to be today, is not necessarily historically where Zahor is located. So it's more likely that the actual kingdom of Zahor was located near Vikramashila, near modern-day Patna in northern India. This, however, there's no way to pinpoint where that is these days. And so more recently, with the efforts of Gautam Rinpoche, this was recognized as the site where one can connect to the blessings of that activity of what happened. And so this is the Tsopema that most people visit today and do retreat. There's several different places where people can do extended retreat. It's a lot of yogi activity here. So after he left Sopema, left Zahor, really, he went up into Nepal and practiced with Mandarava in the cave of Maratika. And so this is kind of the beginning of Guru Rinpoche entering into this sort of new stage where he's no longer going around receiving empowerments from the various Mahasiddhas in India and starting to really put these teachings into practice in these auspicious places of Nepal. And so the first cave he practiced in is Maratika, which is amazing to visit today. It's in the town of Hilasi, which is about an 8-hour journey by jeep from Kathmandu to the east. And it's definitely the biggest of all the caves that I've ever been to associated with Guru Rinpoche. There are 2 of them. The upper cave is where he practiced with Mandarava and famously attained the city of long life. And he is said to have met face to face with Amitayus himself. Amitayus is another form of Amitabha, but meaning limitless life, and received a blessing from Amitayus that him and Mandarava took the city and attained essentially immortality, but lifelessness. This is where Maratika is located. And then after Maratika, let me just show some pictures of Maratika. So these are the caves. Upper cave here. This is a self-arisen Bumpa, a vase that's said to be present since the amazing encounter with Amitayus. And these are the images of those practicing. This is Mandarava, Guru Rinpoche, and Amitayus in the middle. After this incredible thing, then Guru Rinpoche kind of continues on his journey. There is a life story of Mandarava as well, but I'm not as familiar with where her journey takes her after this, but you don't really hear of Guru Rinpoche and Mandarava after this event. He moves on to what is today, so if you read Tibetan texts and you see reference to Nepal, they're always talking about the Kathmandu Valley. And so after leaving Maratika, then he moves into Nepal. Or Pelyu in Tibetan. And this is kind of this valley really, but then later it got known to be the whole country that we know of now. So Guru Rinpoche heads to this region, which is already kind of a well-known region for Buddhist activity, and visits the self-arisen stupa, this Swayambhu stupa, which is the most sacred of stupas in the Kathmandu Valley for the Newar Buddhists. I'm sure Rose could talk more about this one. But this is said to be obviously somebody built what's on top of the stupa, but the actual blessed thing itself, this sort of self-emanating aspect of wisdom was there since the beginning of this time, and has always been a deep source of blessings that was revealed by Manjushri, when Manjushri famously cut the gorge in the Kathmandu Valley to drain the lake that was variously covering the whole area. So Guru Rinpoche goes to this area near Swayambhu and meets another consort. This one is Shakya Devi. She's a Shakya of the Shakya clan, and her and Guru Rinpoche then go to Asura Yanglasho. And so at Asura, this is kind of you could say this is the Bodh Gaya for Nyingmapas. This is where Guru Rinpoche actually attains the supreme city of Mahamudra. And he practices first in the lower cave, which is depicted down here, but here's a better picture of it. So first Guru Rinpoche practices in the lower cave, using Nyandak Haruka as his deity. And after practicing Haruka for some time, then he goes to the upper cave of Asura and practices Vajrakilaya. And with these wrathful means, he's able to fully eradicate any form of clinging to any type of ego whatsoever, and enters into the state of a supreme Vidyadhara, a completely awakened Buddha, completely equipped tantric master. He becomes the full-fledged version of Guru Rinpoche that makes his way into Tibet. And really it's from, so after his time in Asura, these are the deities that he practiced there. He is given a seat in a monastery in Patan, modern day Patan. So this is Avihara, or not Quabahal, but Avihara, as it's, Avihara as they call it. This was recognized again by Chatra Rinpoche. Nobody really knew what this, they knew that Guru Rinpoche had a monastery, had a seat in this famous Buddhist kingdom, but they didn't know exactly where, and it was thanks to Chatra Rinpoche that it was recognized as such. And this is a picture of Gujam Rinpoche as well, who helped establish Sotenma. So then Guru Rinpoche goes to, after his time in Patan, he's then, we don't have enough time for Tibet. I think I have to end here, because there's no way I can talk about Tibet in the next, I think I'll tell the story really quickly of Samye Monastery, and then we'll close it out with that. So during his time while he's in Avihara, simultaneously you could kind of say that King Tristan Ditsen is attempting to establish Buddhism more thoroughly in Tibet. And so this is after the first wave of Buddhism had entered Tibet with Sonsen Gampo. So King Tristan Ditsen brings this great abbot, Santarakshita, who we talked about earlier, making aspirations at the stupa. And they try to build this monastery. But as they build the monastery by day, they go to sleep and they wake up and demons in the night keep knocking all the bricks down. And so the abbot, Santarakshita, says, there's no way we can do this with just my help. We have to bring in the big guns. We have to bring in Guru Rinpoche, the great Tantrika, because me alone, this isn't going to work. I can help establish the monastic system here once the monastery is complete, and I can teach many Dharma texts. I'm a great Pandita, but I don't have the tantric prowess to handle these vicious demons. And so the king sends his emissaries to Nepal to invite Guru Rinpoche up to Samye Monastery. And Guru Rinpoche agrees to go, and he flies through the sky, as a great tantrika would do, to this border crossing place called Mangyul, which is actually still, a pass to get into Tibet. It's used by traders. It's one of the main land crossings from Nepal into the high Tibetan plateau. And so Guru Rinpoche goes to Mangyul. He beats all the other people who were supposed to escort him into near Lhasa, where Samye Monastery is located. But eventually the king's emissaries arrive there, and they escort him into where Samye Monastery is located today. And with Guru Rinpoche's help, he's able to tame all these vicious beings that were preventing the construction. So with Guru Rinpoche's help, he actually is able to complete the construction of the monastery. And not just Guru Rinpoche, but these demons that were knocking the bricks down at night, they say, were actually assisting to build the Gompa in Tibet. So when you visit Sanya Monastery in Tibet, there's certain bricks, you can see layers that were laid down by humans, and then other layers that are kind of wonky, not necessarily placed in a way that looks ordinary. They say that was laid down by the demons. And so it's a group effort to construct Samye Monastery. So Samye Monastery really becomes Tibet's first great monastery, the first place where Vajrayana was transmitted through Tibet. And I think we have to stop here, sadly, even though we're really just getting into the beginning of Guru Rinpoche sites, because Tibet is where there's countless Guru Rinpoche sites. This is really the Mecca for the pilgrim of Guru Rinpoche. This is where all his activity takes place. So just as we talked about Bihar in this region of India with the Buddha and these different places of the Buddha's miracles, you have Guru Rinpoche doing all these miraculous things throughout Tibet. And he also establishes these 8 caves that are similar to the 8 charnel grounds where he practiced in India and where other Mahasiddhas practiced. And then on his, after spending quite some time in Tibet, some people argue about the amount of time that he spent there, he leaves and goes to the Pure Land of Zongdol Palri, where Guru Rinpoche is said to abide to this very day. He has his own Pure Land, just like Amitabha does. His is a little bit more wrathful than Amitabha's Pure Land. So that was a lot that we just went over in a short amount of time. I wanted to leave more time for Q&A, but we can do, I think, a few questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Roman, for excellent, fascinating talk. Thank you a lot. We covered a little bit in our class, but I think you brought so many new knowledges in this class. And I hope in the future,
Thank you.
to keep it going.
Thank you. Yeah, we got to
And
do
you
it.
have something to.
I do, yeah.
And before we, a few questions, he has to.
Yeah. So if anybody wants, this is kind of an aside, but I talked a bit about Padraig Rinpoche as the main, he's my root guru, and his big reason that we were able to do this project, him and his wife. But I'm going to screen teachings of his based on the Jewel Ornament of Liberation. So we're going to study it as a group. I'll just leave this poster out in where you guys have the communal area. But we're going to meet 2 times a month, so Sundays at 10 a.m. starting this Sunday. So we'll meet, it'll be a bi-monthly meetup, and we'll do like about a 20-ish minute teaching, and then a group practice, and then some discussion. And yeah, we'll be going through Gampopa's Jewel Ornament of Liberation, chapter by chapter with Padraig Rinpoche. It'll take a good amount of time because we're only meeting twice a month, and I think there's...
This is in person.
In person, yes, in person. So the idea behind it is Padraig Rinpoche made several series of teachings, and it's kind of his method to get his Sangha that's spread out throughout the world to meet up in the various cities that they're located in. And then the second thing, and this, I'm glad we finished at Samye Monastery in Tibet, because Padraig Rinpoche was able to use this name to pretty much brand all of his activities. So I work with his translation group called Samye Translations, but I also work in the summers at a retreat center in upstate New York that's really just called Samye New York. It was called, I think it was Samye Hermitage. I don't know whether we've officially dropped the Hermitage from the name, but it serves as a hermitage. If you want, you can do retreat there. Otherwise, in the summer, we're offering a summer immersion program, it's a Buddhist studies program based on the 5 sciences, which are these different elements that most monks would study in the monastery, not necessarily just, studying Tantra and doing puja all the time, although we do pujas up there as well. So that will include, there's a Tibetan medicine, there is a Tonka painting class, there is a class on Buddhist philosophy, there's another class on how to integrate Dharma into your own life. Last year, we did another one on finances, just because some people, we're just kind of wandering around as Buddhist practitioners. Some of us don't really know how to handle money very well. So we also had a short course on that. So if you guys are interested in this, this is taking place this summer in upstate New York. I'll also leave that.
And also, I requested Robert if our Pakistani Pacific visit LA, we really want to host him and give teaching. So anytime, every
Yeah.
year we want to host him.
We hope, yeah. He came last winter right after the fires hit, so it was a very awkward time for
We
Mary.
had one session, so we want more session.
Yeah, so we have to request him to do a long.
So we can start a question and answer, few question and answer before we end.
Yeah, I think we're at time, but I can take, yeah, definitely. I have all the time in the world, so it's up to you guys.
If you have any question. I'm very curious about who designed all the artwork. It's very fascinating.
Yeah, somebody in Nepal, one of Norbala's, Rimsh's wife, one of her friends.
Very beautiful. And the real.
Well, this one is this is a depiction of pure vision that Chögyalingpa had of Guru Rinpoche's Pure Land. The Thangka painter, I forget, but this was hanging at Sechen Monastery in Bodha for some time. This is a pretty.
So these three books are based on the Prema Katha, right?
Yeah,
But not only Prema Katha, but oral teaching of many things
That's right.
incorporated.
that's right. So the books are kind of a combination of oral teachings from Patrul Rinpoche, from Metin Choling Rinpoche, other masters that we came across that have helped us in our research, and then supplemented with this kind of summation of the Pema.
This may be the biggest groundbreaking. So far, nobody compiled such a huge information about purpose of it. Only Katha to translated the Prema Katha before.
Right.
But this one, very way ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, it's amazing. And, again, I can't take credit for
Yeah, it's amazing.
for this, most of this work. I helped, but it was a group effort for sure. And it's, yeah, really, I know when we were working on it that Kandula told us, like, this is the best thing you'll ever do in your life. You should really rejoice, because this is a big thing to be connected to. So I'm very happy to be connected to it, and I'm very happy to be invited here to talk about it, because it's a bit of a niche thing for those that aren't sort of initiated into the realm of Guru Rinpoche. But for those that are, it's very fascinating work. And last year we did a pilgrimage. We did a big group trip with about 25 people to Nepal, and we intend to do at least one pilgrimage per year. Ideally, we want to do one in the fall and one in the spring. So a Buddha the pilgrimage to the sites of the Buddha I showed you, and then in the spring around Losar to the sites of Guru Rinpoche. But this year we had one planned, but we ended up canceling after the protests in Nepal, because when we announced, it was right when things were getting a little wonky, and as I understand, the elections are coming up in a few weeks actually in Nepal. So our timing was going to be right when the new elections were happening. So we were a little worried that it would be
Next time I want to find.
yeah, next.
I have seen the Matrika there.
Martika, you've been.
Yeah, Alicia one. I haven't seen that.
Oh, you've never been. Oh, you should go. Has anybody here been to any of these places, or
A few,
what's it?
a few in Nepal.
Okay, cool. Which ones?
Yamesho, Maratika,
The classes.
all the Buddha, everything around the Kathmandu.
Albert, you have been to Swan Valley too.
Yes,
Okay, wow,
I went last year on the grant. I got really lucky.
that's awesome.
Not an academic prowess. I was the least academic person.
Wow.
That was really cool.
So
He was gonna go the same thing.
So my question is that the Odisha is also part, like somebody claimed that that's the Udiana, right? Odisha.
Yeah, I've heard this, but I don't know how it,
Maybe the
is that.
Indian government trying to
Yeah.
promote that.
Yeah, I have heard that, but I don't know whether that, I think it's just similar in name. But Odisha definitely has sites that are related to the Mahasiddhas at least.
But Swat Valley has more authentic.
Swat Valley seems to be the one that everybody was agreed on. And then there's this, as I said, the other one in Gujarat, that's Chatra Vishya identified. But Odisha, I don't know.
So Rinpoche funded it all, or did you all get a grant? And how long did it take for the 3 books?
Yeah, it's been self-funded, so we've just been doing, we have monthly donations coming in from people that support the translation group. So Samya Translations is the group, and then NACOR is kind of like a subsidiary of Samya Translations. I myself, I can read Tibetan, but I'm not really great translator. I don't do translation, but I help edit the work when it is translated. And I also just help in general with their communication stuff, so doing things like this, and I send out monthly emails on auspicious days and helped organize the pilgrimage, so a lot of this kind of
You're the utilities player.
yeah, you could say that for sure. And yeah, it's been tough to push it forward. We're still pushing it forward. So our idea is to release an app, and then the app is going to have there's like a subscription that you can join, and it's going to almost be like what's the one for hiking?
All trails.
There's going to be like an all trails for.
It's a really good idea, really smart.
And so we're gonna really have it like in detail, how do you get to these places? And the idea is we're hoping that people will maybe pay $5 a month, or if they wanna join just temporarily, then it would be a different price while they're at the location. Because we are kind of hitting a wall with being able to give this information out for free.
Yeah.
And so we're moving into figuring out how to continue this project, push it forward, but and push it beyond just the Buddha and Guru Rinpoche, pushing it into, at pretty much any Buddhist pilgrimage site there is our big aspiration, is to really be like a mega catalog of all these sites, ideally throughout Asia, but then who knows how far it could go. But we're mainly starting, Guru Rinpoche and the Buddha first, and then everything will spring out from there.
One last question before we end. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Again, it's also this can be agree. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, this was really, again, really special for me to be able to come, so really happy.
So let's take one group picture and newsletter.